Well, hello, friends. Good to be with you again on this third week of Easter. Jason Smith here again in the empty sanctuary here at First Presbyterian Church. And I do welcome you into this time of devotional, into this time of exploring what resurrection means in the midst of this very interesting pandemic. I hope you're all staying safe and sound. Keeping up with your loved ones, with your friends through as much social media and Zoom calls and emails and text messages as possible. But I have to tell you, I do miss this community. I miss this community a whole lot. And I'm hopeful that we could possibly meet again soon, although we still have not made a decision as to May meeting, but we will let you know in the next week or so. So keep up on our Facebook page and on the emails to see as to what the status is going to be of that. And so right now, friends, there's not a lot to announce. There's not a whole lot of announcements. I invite you to keep praying for the folks on our prayer list, for John Hobgood, for Dick Rudolph, for Christy McInerney, for Bill and Ruby Mertens, for Lisa Spear, for Ryan and Catherine Hallaby. Please be in prayer for these church members that may need God right now, may need to hear and feel the presence of God right now. And I might even add that you could add me to the prayer list, as I have injured myself this week. I apparently don't know how to play with my kids yet. I'm still learning the manual, and I dislocated my ring finger. And yes, it was painful. Yes, it was awkward, uncomfortable. I went to the emergency room, got it taken care of. But I would appreciate some prayer and some good wishes as I continue to recover. So I'll be okay. It's my left hand, and so I'll be all right. But it's just another part of living in this new normal in the midst of this pandemic, trying to live creatively and trying to find things to do while you're cooped up in the house. So I'm going to be fine. I will make an announcement that I hadn't announced a few weeks ago. I was hoping I could do it in person, but First Presbyterian Church, along with West End Presbyterian Church as a partner, we partnered together and wrote a grant proposal through the Forum for Theological Exploration. It's an entity out of Atlanta, and we received a grant for $10,000 to begin what we're calling the Arkadelphia Beloved Community Fellows program. Now, I'm announcing you that we received this grant, and we're hopeful that we might be able to start a program to put some energy toward our outreach, our shared outreach, this church and West End outreach with college students, and provides some type of youth programs, some type of shared youth programs that our churches could engage in, and also provide some support for the Arkadelphia Community Family Enrichment Center food bank. Now, I tell you that we received this grant, but this project it's tentative and it's on hold right now, and so we're not sure if we're going to launch this very cool program this year or not. We're as with everything going on right now, it's unsure what the fall is going to look like. So I tell you this good news, but we'll continue to keep you informed about how we proceed and when we fully officially launch the program, just as when we'll open the church doors again. So that's exciting news, but not sure when we're going to fully launch it. But I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you to all of you who are still supporting us with your tithes and offerings. Keep this up as much as possible, as much as you can. We really appreciate it. Ed McCorkle, the treasurer, appreciates it. And and Kaver in the church office also appreciates it. So thank you so much for continued support for First Presbyterian Church and being a Presbyterian presence here in Arkadelphia. Well, friends, as we gather for this devotional, I invite us into this time of reflection, into this time of hopefully a meaningful time of communing with the Spirit. And to open our time, we will read from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. I invite you to join along. Now, on that same day, 2 of the disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles or so from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all of these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" Well, they stood still, looking sad. And then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you really the only stranger in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have taken place there these days?" The stranger asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "Well, the things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all of the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all of this, it's now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they didn't find his body there, they came back. And they told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see him." And the stranger looked at them and he said, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" And then, beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all of the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, the stranger walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread. He blessed it and broke it, and he gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished at that moment from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" At that same hour they got up and they returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he's appeared to Simon." And then the 2 told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. While they walked along. Well, today's story from Luke is among the favorite texts for many ministers. It's a story of discernment. It's a story of hospitality. It's a story about the mysteries of the Spirit in our midst. It's a story that you can basically take in just about any direction. with your sermon. It's a rich text, and like with Scripture, it's always something you're going to read and rediscover with each rereading. You'll rediscover something new each time. Among the things that the disciples are wrestling with is the grief that is at the beginning of this new chapter in their lives, a chapter that's filled with uncertainty, a chapter without Jesus, a chapter where they're pondering a hopeless future, all while they walked along. We're aware that as the disciples were discussing all the things that had happened as they walked along, the mood was sad, as it says in the text. It was one of despair, one of lost hope. See, they were headed back to their old world, their old selves, the world as it once was. Back to a world where their lives would continue, back to dust off their fishing boats and untangle their nets that had been left for a year or longer, back to their tax collector offices to see if they could reassemble their position in town with that job, back to their lives before they decided to follow this stranger, this Jesus. Perhaps above all other things, they were returning to a world that was real, a world where people lived and a world where people died. We know the name of only one of the disciples in this story, and the text says that they were leaving Jerusalem on a 7-mile journey to the town of Emmaus. Now, Emmaus is a city mentioned just once in the Bible. It's here in this passage. Its exact coordinates are unknown. In fact, one commentary I read said that the translation might not even be 7 miles. It could be as much as 19 miles away from Jerusalem. But we do know that it's a ways away, at least a day's journey on foot. It's such a wide swath of territory that I think adds a bit to the mystery of this place, the mystery of where they were going. They were trying to get anywhere, to get out of Jerusalem, to get out from beneath the vast cloud of grief that was hanging over their heads, conversing, trying to figure it out while they walked along. From Scott Hosey's commentary on this passage, I read an interesting anecdote about C.S. Lewis this week. After the death of his wife, Joy, C.S. Lewis writes that the grief of his wife dying was so intense, so heavy, so all-encompassing, that he sought to change the space around him so as to escape, to run away from the profoundness of his grief. He thought his grief might be less if he intentionally avoided the places that he and his wife frequented. And so he limited his visits to only those places where they had never been together. He walked to new grocery stores. He tried different restaurants. He walked along by himself, only through streets and paths and trails that he and Joy had never taken. But it didn't work. For Lewis, grief was like a long, long valley, a winding valley where any bend may reveal a totally new landscape while you walk along. The valley of grief, seemingly an endless valley, unsure of the curves and the turns, was maybe why these two disciples weren't able to recognize the stranger. Why were their eyes kept from recognizing this man, this Jesus in their midst? Well, we don't know. I kind of wonder if he was wearing one of those nose mustache glasses, or maybe he was wearing a scream mask. We just don't know why the disciples were unable to discern who he was. I mean, they knew him well. After years of following him around the countryside, listening to his voice, knowing the way that he talks, the way that he looks. But I guess they were exhausted, maybe, after that weekend, and maybe they just weren't paying very good attention. Maybe they were so focused on the valley of grief that they were in that they just couldn't focus on the person that was right next to them, the person who happened to be their leader, the person who they had just watched die. Perhaps this trauma in the past was somehow keeping them from an awareness of what was going on in the present while they walked along. So they start a conversation. Well, actually, Jesus starts a conversation with them on the road. When we first moved to Arkansas a few years ago from Washington, D.C., I was amazed at how it seemed like everybody wanted to have a conversation with me, the strangers that I would meet everywhere, in line at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, at every restaurant we'd go to. Every stranger that we would meet wanted to know where we were from, wanted to talk about the weather, wanted to ruminate for just a few minutes. And I have to admit, I've gotten much better at having conversations with strangers. I wasn't very good at first, honestly, but eventually I learned the art of it, the art of people coming up and beginning to talk to you, the art of starting some of those conversations with strangers myself, the art of being in hospitality with people. So a stranger begins to follow these two. He butts into their conversation and asks, "So what are y'all talking about?" And in asking this simple question, he offers an opportunity for them to give a very good overview of the gospel story, of the good news. Through telling this story, through their unbelief at the fact that he didn't know what was going on, they begin to understand what they believe. They somehow begin to conceptualize what has actually happened after their grief as they walked along. Preaching legend Fred Craddock, who I really should stop referencing because I just reference him a lot, but I love things that he writes. He said that there are three ways to understand the context of a memorable experience or an event, something that has happened, something that you have done. So let's just give an example that you and someone else are going to decide to walk along Feaster Trail. So there's the before you start walking, where you anticipate the trail, where you prepare, where you tie your shoes, maybe you're going to stretch, maybe you check the weather. And then there's the actual experiencing of the event in the present. The feeling of walking down the trail, the smells that you get, the fresh air in the woods, the experiences you have greeting others, walking alongside, hearing the birds, being there. And there's the lingering memories of the event that come later, the thinking about it that evening while lying in bed. Craddock says that in anticipating the event, we're hindered by not knowing what exactly is going to happen. You can eagerly anticipate the walk down Feaster Trail, but who knows how great or awful it's going to be. You might step in something you didn't want to step in. You didn't know that before you started walking. And in the moment of walking the trail, Craddock says we're so hindered by the clutter and confusion of everything happening around us so fast that it's hard to pay attention and know what's going on. But it's in remembering, it's in recognition where realization and understanding happen. It's actually after an event, once it's happened, that we can start to survey the meaning that that event or experience has had on our lives. These two disciples were still very unaware of what was happening, unsure of his death, unsure of what they'd done that Saturday, unsure of what the women's story meant from the tomb. And even when this stranger started to try and unpack things with them, they were still in the midst of experiencing it all, of understanding it. Easter had still not manifested itself yet. But for the disciples, it wouldn't be too long before they began to get it. See, as night began to fall and the mysterious traveler indicated he was going to continue on his journey, the two disciples, they knew they couldn't let him go off alone. They knew that night was not a good time to be on the road by yourself with bandits out in the wilderness and who knows what else. So they said, you want to stay behind with us. Why don't you stay with us? In fact, why don't you just come get some supper with us, and then you can stay with us tonight and start your journey tomorrow. And it seems at supper that everything started to come together, that something magical began to happen, where the past and the present and the future, where time itself began to transform before them. Everything melted into this one heavy moment. We may have experienced moments like this before. The lumps in our throat, the hairs going up on our skin, the times when time stood still, the moments where the Spirit just shows up. And what were they doing? Well, they were breaking bread. They were sharing communion, the Eucharist. Jesus broke the bread at the table. He blessed it. And it seems right then they began to understand it all. They were regenerated. They were renewed. They were refreshed. Just through this simple hospitality, through the conversation, through sharing company, through lodging and breaking bread with each other. These disciples were able to step outside of their grief and finally, after all this time and trauma, finally see the face of Jesus. They finally understood the meaning of their journey. They finally understood this stranger. They finally understood the meaning of it all while they walked along. We might be walking along right now, literally or metaphorically. We might be going to the grocery store with our masks and our bandanas, trying to stay 6 feet away from everyone, wondering, what is the meaning of this all? Did Easter even happen? I mean, what day is it? What month is it? Is it really time for another Zoom meeting? Do I have to do this again? Some of us might say, well, I guess I remember Easter. Was it like 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago? Was it last week? Was it a month? We're still in this hazy space. We might even be asking ourselves, why do I feel this way? I can't put my finger on it, but it feels like the world is very lonely. Nothing makes sense to me. I can't even figure out what words to say to explain this moment. And so we may want to just keep walking. To just keep walking miles and miles away from where we are, to try and get away from it all and clear our heads. We might be mourning Jesus' death still. We might still be grieving. We might not be able to see Jesus in our lives anywhere. Because, friends, we're still in the midst of experiencing a very different reality. The pandemic, of course, but we're also in the midst of Easter, trying to figure out what resurrection means in this very strange new world. But I feel as though the more patient we are with one another, I feel as though the more love we're able to share with each other on our journeys, 6 feet distance, of course, I feel like the more of Christ we can be to each other. And I feel like the more we can be in communion with each other, perhaps a virtual communion with each other, we can begin to find the meaning in the middle of it all, and to truly see Jesus in each other, in a stranger, while we walk along. I have faith that we will find meaning at the end of this period of isolation, of this grief and death-filled period. I have hope that in telling this story one day, the story of the spring of 2020, the story of living resurrection in this period, we'll know more about ourselves at least. We'll know more about hope. We'll be able to see the face of Jesus better in the faces of others while we walk along. So friends, let us keep our faith. Let us tell our story. Let us see the face of Jesus in others while we walk along. Thanks be to God. Amen. Thank you, friends. It's always good to be with you. It will be wonderful to share communion with you one day in the presence of each other. But for now, as we walk along on our separate journeys, let's hope that they will lead us back to each other. Let's hope that we'll see God along the way. Take care. Peace be with you.